A single heartbeat on a monitor can change the fate of an entire hospital. The night shift in St. Vincent's Hospital was quiet. Too quiet for a place built to deal with chaos. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the polished linoleum floors. Clara Evans adjusted her scrubs, the worn fabric a familiar comfort against the cold of the emergency room. Her badge glinted under the harsh overhead light. Charge nurse. Experienced, trusted, unshakable. She moved with a quiet precision, checking monitors, adjusting 4 lines and murmuring to herself in that soft, methodical tone that only years of routine could produce. Every step, every glance, every motion was calculated, rehearsed. She had taken an oath years ago, a promise to save lives, no matter the cost. And tonight, like every night, that oath felt heavier. The ER was a chessboard, and she was already thinking 5 moves ahead. Nurses hustled, interns fumbled, and the faint hum of machinery created a constant underlying tension. Clara watched, silently correcting mistakes before they even happened. A hand on a shoulder, a quiet word, an authority not demanded but earned. Somewhere in the corridor a distant alarm beeped, soft at first, almost ignorable. But to Clara, it was a pulse in the veins of the hospital, a subtle reminder that life and death dance their eternal game here every night. She didn't flinch. She had seen it all before, or so she thought. Her mind drifted briefly to the weight of her decision-making. Every choice she made tonight could ripple far beyond these walls. A wrong step, a delayed response, a missed signal. People could die. And she carried that knowledge silently, like a hidden burden that no one could truly understand. A shadow moved near the triage station. Clara's eyes narrowed. A young nurse fumbled with the charts. The fear was evident, the kind of fear that could paralyze someone in seconds. Clara stepped in, calm, commanding, yet gentle. "Focus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. "Stay with me. We do this together, one step at a time." It was more than instruction. It was reassuring. It was controlled. It was her presence alone that transformed panic into purpose. She moved among the chaos like a conductor, orchestrating life itself. And yet, tonight she felt it. A shift in the air. The faint tremor beneath the hum of the hospital. Something was coming. Something urgent. Something that would test her oath in ways she had never imagined. She didn't know what or who, but Clara knew one thing: when the storm hit, she would be ready. Her hand brushed the edge of the monitor. She felt the pulse beneath her fingers, a heartbeat, steady, defiant. Tonight it would not remain steady for long. The emergency doors slid open with a screech that cut through the otherwise controlled chaos of the night. The paramedics rushed in, dragging a stretcher that seemed almost too heavy to bear. Clara's eyes immediately locked on the patient. A young man, barely conscious, blood staining the side of his face, labored breathing echoing against the sterile walls. Late teens, trauma victims, car accident, one of the paramedics shouted over the rush. Their voices were urgent but unshaken, professionals conditioned to the worst. Clara didn't respond immediately. She had learned long ago that the first few seconds could determine everything. She observed, calculated, prepared. The ER staff formed a protective circle around the stretcher. Monitors were set, 4 lines readied, oxygen masks checked. Clara moved in like a shadow, her hands precise, her eyes scanning every indicator. Every piece of equipment, every vital sign, every subtle change in the patient's body told a story. And she read it all, instantly. BP dropping. "Pulse weak," murmured one of the nurses. Clara's gaze sharpened. She leaned closer, her voice steady but commanding. "Administer 1 milligram of epinephrine. I need a line in the left arm now. Monitor oxygen. Call radiology on standby." The words flowed from her like a script she had rehearsed thousands of times, yet this was no rehearsal. Lives hung in the balance, and Clara knew it. The room moved in a synchronized chaos under her guidance. Every instruction is precise, every movement deliberate. The young man's eyes flickered open briefly, a glazed, fearful stare. Clara caught it, and something unspoken passed between them. She nodded gently, a silent assurance amidst the storm. Time seemed to stretch. The steady hum of the monitors now punctuated every second. The tension was palpable, almost physical, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Paramedics and nurses moved like clockwork, each step guided by Clara's unwavering presence. A sudden irregularity in the heart monitor drew a sharp intake of breath from the team. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Clear the airway. We need to stabilize before intubation. Go!" Her voice sliced through the panic, commanding focus. No hesitation, no doubt, only clarity. Minutes passed, or was it hours? In this room, time was irrelevant, only survival mattered. Slowly, steadily, the young man's vitals began to stabilize. The immediate danger, though not gone, had lessened. Clara allowed herself a brief exhale, almost imperceptible. The storm had passed, at least for now, but she knew it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The critical arrival was a warning, a prelude to something far more complex, something that would test every skill, every instinct, every ounce of her commitment. And Clara Evans? She was ready. The hallway outside the emergency room was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently as if signaling unease. The faint echo of hurried footsteps bounced off the sterile walls. Clara didn't move at first. She remained at the edge of the room, eyes scanning the corridor like a predator assessing its territory. Something was off. The air had a tension, almost tangible, pressing against her chest. Usually the ER hummed with controlled chaos, but tonight felt different. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Doors opened without a sound, and a subtle shift in the atmosphere told her instinctively that someone or something was watching. A nurse passed by, unaware of the undercurrent of danger. Clara's gaze followed her, but it wasn't the staff she was concerned about. It was the figure at the far end of the hallway, leaning against the wall just out of clear view. Silent, still, observing. Clara's pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition. She had trained for situations like this, subtle threats that went unnoticed by everyone else. In moments like these, instincts were sharper than any monitor or protocol. She moved forward, each step deliberate, her eyes fixed on the shadow. The figure didn't flinch, it didn't move. And yet, Clara felt its presence like a weight pressing into her shoulder. A pause, a heartbeat longer than normal, before the figure slowly stepped back into the darkness, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The hallway seemed to exhale, and the flickering lights steadied. For a moment it was just her and the sterile walls again. But Clara knew better. The brief encounter was a warning, a signal that the calm was only temporary. She could feel the tension stretching, coiling, ready to snap. A phone buzzed sharply on a nearby counter. She ignored it. The sound barely registered against the rhythm of her own focus. She knew that every second counted, every shadow could hold danger, and every movement, hers and others, was being observed. Clara took a deep breath, letting the oxygen fill her lungs, steadying the storm that churned quietly beneath her calm exterior. She retraced her steps to the ER, her mind racing yet meticulously calculating her next moves. The young patient's life depended on the stability within the room, but the hallway whispered a different kind of threat, one that wasn't just medical. She reached the doorway, pausing to glance back once more. The hallway was empty, or at least it appeared so, but Clara Evans knew better than to trust appearances. Shadows were deceptive, and tonight they were speaking in a language only she could hear. With one final glance, she stepped back into the controlled chaos of the ER, but the image of the silent observer lingered in her mind. Every instinct screamed that this was just the beginning. Some threats were visible, some were not. And tonight, the shadows had already marked their presence. The hospital's intercom crackled suddenly, a staccato of static that cut through the tense silence of the ER. Clara froze mid-step, every nerve in her body alert. That sound. It wasn't routine. Not tonight. Not after the shadow in the hallway. She moved toward the source, careful not to draw attention. Every movement was calculated, almost invisible. Her eyes scanned the monitors, the doors, the scattered medical equipment, anything that could conceal a threat. The staff continued their work, oblivious, their focus swallowed by charts and patients, but Clara's attention was fractured, stretched thin across possibilities that no one else would even consider. A nurse bumped into her, startled, murmuring an apology, but Clara didn't respond. Her eyes caught a flicker on the small security monitor mounted above the reception desk. A figure had appeared briefly in the corridor behind the waiting area, a shadow darting just out of frame, almost teasing her. Then the intercom crackled again, sharper this time. A voice, distorted, almost robotic, whispered a single word. Wait. Clara's pulse spiked. Wait. What was she waiting for? And who or what was issuing the command? Her mind raced through the possibilities, a prank, a miscommunication, or a message meant for her alone. She had learned long ago that in situations like this, nothing was accidental. The young patient she had left in the trauma bay was stable for now, but her instinct screamed that stability was temporary. She needed information, she needed clarity, and she needed it fast. She edged closer to the monitor, watching the corridor like a hawk. The figure had vanished again, but a subtle movement caught her eye, a reflection in the glass panel of the emergency exit doors. A shadow mirrored her every step, careful not to be obvious, but precise enough to be noticed by someone who knew how to look. Clara's fingers itched toward the radio on her belt. She didn't speak yet. She needed to understand the pattern, to anticipate the next move. The silence in the ER, punctuated only by beeping machines and the muffled voices of staff, seemed to stretch longer than normal, as if the world had slowed just for her. Then, abruptly, the intercom went dead. Just static, nothing more. The shadow, the figure, the signal, they were gone as quickly as they had appeared. But Clara knew it wasn't over. Her gaze swept the ER one last time. Calm faces, routine movements, but beneath it all she felt the pulse of the unseen threat, steady and relentless. It was a game, and someone, or something, was controlling the pieces from the shadows. Clara exhaled, silently, and returned to her patient, her mind racing through contingencies. The signal had been clear, even if the message was cryptic. Tonight, the ER wasn't just a place of healing, it had become a chessboard, and every move mattered. Clara barely had a moment to breathe before the next unsettling realization hit her. Someone was watching, not just the fleeting shadow in the corridor, but someone who knew exactly how to remain invisible in plain sight. Every instinct she had screamed it, an observer, silent, patient, calculating. Her eyes darted across the ER. Doctors moved between patients, nurses wheeled gurneys past, phones rang and monitors beeped. But amidst all this chaos, Clara saw the subtle tells, a reflection in a glass panel, a slight movement behind a curtain, the way a janitor's gaze lingered just a fraction too long on her. She didn't react immediately. Any sudden movement would alert the watcher. Patience was her ally. She needed to understand, to identify, before making her next move. Slowly, methodically, she traced every line of sight, every angle, until she noticed a detail others would dismiss, a shadow that didn't belong, just on the edge of her peripheral vision. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to confirm her suspicion. Someone had infiltrated the ER, blending seamlessly with the environment, like a ghost. The question wasn't if they were dangerous, it was how long they had been here and what they were waiting for. Clara's mind raced through scenarios. Was this someone with medical knowledge, or just an opportunist? Were they after a specific patient, or perhaps her? The way the shadow moved suggested training, not luck. Every step calculated, every pause deliberate. She decided to act without acting. Slowly, she adjusted her route, moving toward the nurse's station with a casual gait, watching for reactions. The observer remained silent, hidden, but the tension in the air was palpable. Clara could almost feel their presence pressing against her awareness, testing her resolve, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, or vanish entirely. The patients were oblivious, the staff unaware, but Clara knew that one misstep, one overlooked detail, could change everything. Her mind sharpened, filtering out noise, isolating patterns, anticipating moves before they happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, a glimmer of movement caught her eye near the supply closet. The observer's reflection shimmered in the stainless steel surface. For a fraction of a second, the figure's silhouette was clear, tall, composed, deliberate. And then it was gone again, leaving only a faint echo in her memory. Clara didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that fear was a tool, but vigilance was survival. Every second mattered, every observation counted. The hidden observer wasn't just a presence, it was a message. Someone was testing her, measuring her, and she would be ready. She returned to her patient, keeping her steps light, her senses razor sharp. The ER's rhythm continued around her, oblivious to the silent chess game unfolding in its midst. But Clara knew. The game had begun, and every move from here on would be critical. The ER seemed alive, yet unnervingly quiet in its own way. Machines hummed, monitors beeped, footsteps echoed. But beneath the surface, something sinister lingered. Clara could feel it, a pressure that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. The hidden observer wasn't just watching, they were learning, analyzing, waiting. She moved through the ward with deliberate calm, her mind racing yet her body composed. Every glance, every step was calculated. The silent threat was like a shadow that didn't belong, a presence she could sense but not confront directly. And that was what made it terrifying. It started with small inconsistencies. A tray left in the wrong place, a patient's chart slightly askew, a whisper of movement behind a curtain when she knew no one was there. Each detail, insignificant alone, formed a pattern, a warning she couldn't ignore. Clara's pulse quickened, but she didn't panic. Panic would be the observer's victory. Instead, she began cataloging everything, each shadow, each oddity, every subtle cue that revealed more than words ever could. She had to understand this threat, dissect it in her mind before it could strike. Then came the first direct sign. A patient, alone for a moment, turned pale and whispered something urgent to her. "There's someone watching." The words barely reached her ears, but they carried weight, fear, and confirmation. The threat was real, close, and silent. Clara scanned the room, noting the angles, the blind spots, the places someone could hide and strike without being seen. The observer had a strategy, she realized. Every movement in the ER, every routine had been studied. They weren't reckless, they were methodical, precise, and patient. Her mind mapped the possibilities, entrances, exits, shadows, reflections. Every moment she analyzed, anticipating what the observer might do next. It was a silent game of strategy, a deadly puzzle where even the smallest miscalculation could be fatal. She adjusted her movements, subtle yet deliberate. Each step was a test, each glance a probe. The silent threat was clever, but Clara had learned to think several moves ahead. And she knew this was no ordinary intruder. This was someone who understood control, power, and fear, someone who could disappear and reappear at will. Minutes passed, each feeling like an eternity. Then a flicker in the periphery, a shadow near the supply closet, the same silhouette she had noticed earlier. The observer was close, too close. Clarara's chest tightened. She had anticipated this moment, but anticipation did not erase the danger. Every instinct screamed for caution. Every sense screamed for vigilance. The silent threat was here, but she was ready. And as the ER carried on around them, oblivious to the deadly tension in the air, Clarara understood one undeniable truth: this was only the beginning. The observer was patient, and patience, when paired with skill, was lethal. Clarara's mind raced, but not recklessly. Every encounter, every subtle shift in the ER, carried a hidden meaning she was determined to uncover. The observer wasn't just there to watch. They were orchestrating something, a purpose hidden beneath layers of calculation. She replayed every detail from the past few hours in her mind. The unusual questions the staff had been asked, the brief pauses when certain patients were mentioned, the way certain equipment seemed to have been touched and replaced with uncanny precision. Nothing was accidental. Nothing was random. The thought gnawed at her. Why here? Why now? Every instinct screamed that the motive was personal yet elusive. The observer's eyes, though unseen, seemed to penetrate deeper than mere curiosity. It was as if they were searching for something intangible, something only Clarara could sense but not yet name. She moved through the corridor again, careful, deliberate, every step a probe. Shadows clung to the corners like living things. And then it hit her, small, almost imperceptible clues pointing toward a connection, a reason behind the presence that went beyond mere chaos. The motive was not violence, it was control, understanding, dominance over what unfolded in this fragile environment. Clarara's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. Panic would be surrendered. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of the ER, the subtle behaviors of her colleagues, the unspoken patterns the observer was trying to manipulate. Each detail added a layer to the puzzle, a piece of the unseen motive slowly coming into focus. Then came the realization. The observer wasn't targeting her randomly. It was strategic, specific patients, specific interactions, each revealing more than the eye could see. The motive was a message, one encoded in fear, silence, and precision. Whoever this was, they wanted to prove something, or perhaps to extract something. A confession, a reaction, an outcome only Clarara could trigger. Her gaze fell on the monitors, the blinking lights, the rhythm of life and death interwoven with the observer's unseen hand. Every choice made here, every decision taken, had been anticipated. The motive, hidden yet methodical, was guiding their every action like a conductor shaping a symphony of tension. Clarara understood then that uncovering the motive wasn't just about observation. It was about prediction, intuition, and anticipating the moment when the unseen plan would finally reveal itself. And that moment was coming. She could feel it, like an approaching storm that no one else sensed yet. The ER continued its frantic pace around her, oblivious to the silent calculations, the unseen tension that had gripped every corner of the room. But Clarara was acutely aware. The motive was real. The observer was patient, calculated, and terrifyingly precise. And one thing became certain in her mind: understanding the motive was the only way to survive the unfolding storm. The corridor was eerily quiet, the usual hum of monitors and distant footsteps replaced by a thick, almost suffocating tension. Clarara moved cautiously, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner where movement might betray the unseen observer. She could feel it, an invisible presence, deliberate, waiting. And then it happened. A soft shuffle behind the supply room, a door barely cracked. Her instincts screamed. Clarara stopped, heart steadying but senses razor sharp. The first confrontation wasn't meant to be loud or dramatic. It was subtle, almost surgical, like a predator testing the waters before the strike. She advanced, slow, deliberate, each step measured against the potential for danger. And then she saw them. A figure partially hidden, just enough to remain ambiguous, yet undeniably there. The observer had been expecting her. Or perhaps they had been testing her. A faint smirk, almost imperceptible, was the only hint of recognition. Clarara's voice was calm but firm. "I know you're here. I've been waiting for this moment." Her words hung in the air, charged, more a challenge than a statement. The observer did not respond immediately. They let the silence stretch, an unspoken assertion of control, forcing Clarara to maintain her composure. Every instinct screamed caution. The observer moved with precision, circling, always keeping a safe distance, yet close enough to provoke, to unsettle. Clarara noticed the small gestures, the tilt of the head, the way they shifted weight, the subtle rhythm of their breathing. Each movement is a message, a taunt, a test of her resolve. She mirrored them, a silent dance of strategy and tension. No sudden movements, no reveals, only calculated observation. Clarara understood that the first confrontation was never meant to end here. It was the opening act, a prelude to deeper challenges. The observer's eyes locked onto hers, an unspoken warning. The game had begun, and each move would carry consequences. Clarara's mind raced, analyzing, predicting, readying herself for whatever came next. Every instinct, honed over countless hours, told her that this moment defined the stakes. This confrontation was the line between awareness and vulnerability. And then, almost imperceptibly, the figure retreated, blending into the shadows with the same precision that had marked their presence. Clarara exhaled slowly, tension coiling in her shoulders, heart pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had faced the first challenge, but she knew this was just the beginning. The observer's motives remained hidden, their power undeniable, yet now Clarara had seen a glimpse. She had measured them, felt the edges of their strategy, and survived the first test. But she also knew every confrontation from here would be sharper, closer, more dangerous. The ER, still buzzing with life and oblivious chaos, had become a battlefield unseen by anyone but her. And Clarara understood, with a clarity that chilled her, the first confrontation was over. The war had just begun. Clarara walked through the dimly lit hallway, every footstep echoing louder than it should. The first confrontation had left her senses heightened, nerves sharp, eyes scanning every corner for the faintest hint of movement. But now, amidst the tension, a different feeling began to creep in, a subtle reassurance, fragile yet unmistakable. It started as a whisper of intuition. Someone else was here, moving with purpose, yet careful not to draw attention. Someone who knew the stakes, the kind of presence that could either save her or complicate everything further. From the shadows emerged a figure, silent but unmistakable, not an enemy, but not entirely familiar either. The air shifted. Clarara's eyes met theirs, calm, measured, a silent understanding passing between them. The hidden alley had been watching, waiting for the precise moment to make contact. "Clarara," the figure murmured, voice barely above a whisper, yet firm enough to command attention. There was no time for pleasantries, no room for error. Their eyes conveyed urgency, experience, and a hint of desperation. It was clear they had knowledge that could tip the scales if she was willing to trust. Clarara assessed them carefully. Allies were rare in situations like this, and trust even rarer. Every instinct warned caution, but the subtle gestures, the way they avoided the harsh lights, the careful rhythm of their breathing, spoke of competence, of someone who had navigated this dangerous game before. They moved closer, deliberately, offering no words but a steady presence. Clarara could feel the tension easing slightly, like the tiniest lifeline thrown into stormy waters. The hidden ally was not here to fight, at least not yet, but to guide, to provide insight that could prove critical for the challenges ahead. A glance, a nod, a silent warning. They were here to help, but at a cost. Secrets had to remain hidden, strategies carefully deployed. The ally's eyes flicked toward the corridor Clarara had just traversed, signaling the same threat she had already sensed. The observer was not idle. Every move had been watched, every hesitation noted. "Follow my lead," they finally said, low and deliberate. The voice carried authority, calm but resolute. Clara knew this was more than guidance. It was an invitation into the deeper, unseen layers of the conflict, where survival required precision, stealth, and trust in another's judgment. For the first time since the confrontation, Clara felt a cautious optimism. Not relief, not safety, but a recognition that she was no longer entirely alone. The hidden ally had appeared at the critical juncture, a force poised to balance the scales, to provide insight into the unseen strategies of the observer. As they moved together through the shadowed hallways, the stakes became clearer, the path sharper. Every step was a negotiation, every glance a calculation. And Clara understood the presence of the hidden ally did not simplify the game, it amplified it. But with them by her side, she might just have a chance. The first threads of trust were woven. The hidden ally had entered the game, and now, every shadow, every movement, every whispered warning mattered more than ever. The air in the command room was thick with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. Every monitor, every blinking light, every muffled sound outside felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. Clara and the hidden ally moved with precision, their footsteps measured, almost choreographed, as if the shadows themselves had become part of the plan. The enemy wasn't idle. They were waiting, calculating, observing, anticipating every move. The stakes had shifted. No longer was it just about survival. The game had tightened, boundaries shrinking, margins of error vanishing. Every misstep now carried consequences that could not be undone. Clara's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information gathered from the ally, from her own instincts, from fleeting patterns she had barely noticed. Every piece had significance. Every glance from the observer was loaded with intent. There was no room for hesitation, no moment to second guess. The tension in the air was palpable, almost a physical weight pressing against her chest. They reached a control panel, lights flickering, buttons illuminated in harsh reds and greens. The allies' fingers moved across it with swift, deliberate movements, each press a small maneuver in the larger strategy unfolding. Clara watched, learning, observing, feeling the rhythm of the operation seep into her own reflexes. Trust was essential, but vigilance even more so. Suddenly, an alert, sharp, urgent, blared from the monitors. The enemy had made a move, unexpected, audacious, pushing the boundaries of anticipation. The game had tightened, just as the chapter warned, and they had to react in real time. No room for error. Every decision now carried weight, every pause could mean exposure. The hidden ally signaled, guiding Clara toward a safer path, but the tension didn't ease. It heightened, coiled tighter, like a spring about to release. Movement became tactical, every action deliberate, calculated, as the observers closed in with invisible precision. Clara's heart raced, not with fear, but with focus. The game wasn't about recklessness, it was about control, strategy, and timing. The Allies' presence was a stabilizing force, a reminder that even in the tightening grip of the adversary, preparation and insight could create an opening. They advanced cautiously, a synchronized pair moving through the maze of tension, aware of every shadow, every faint sound. The game was no longer a test, it was a crucible, designed to push them to the edge. And yet, with each calculated move, Clara realized something vital. The tightening of the game was not just a threat, it was a revelation. It was forcing clarity, sharpening instincts, and revealing the true scale of what they were up against. In the constricted corridors, with danger lurking in every corner, the players learned the same lesson simultaneously. The tighter the game, the more decisive each move became. Survival, strategy, and trust were no longer separate. They were entwined, forming the core of the path forward. Every heartbeat, every glance, every calculated step mattered more than ever. The game had tightened, and now losing was no longer an option. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that presses down on the chest, demanding attention. Clara sensed it before she saw it. The subtle shift in the atmosphere, the faintest twitch of a shadow, the almost imperceptible change in the hum of the monitors. The observer had made their move. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. The strike was surgical, precise, a whisper in the dark that could unravel everything. Every plan, every precaution, every calculated step now hung in balance. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then moved instinctively, muscles coiling with tension as she adapted to the sudden shift. The ally beside her tensed, alert, eyes scanning, hands ready. No words were spoken, none were needed. They had rehearsed for this moment in theory, but nothing could truly prepare for the reality of the observer's intrusion. The game had shifted again, and the rules were changing on the fly. The monitors flickered, warnings flashing in sharp reds, a message simple, chilling, and undeniable. The observer knew more than they should. Every move they had made, every route they had considered, every contingency they had anticipated. Clara's mind raced. This wasn't just reconnaissance. This was a strike, deliberate and calculated, meant to test, to provoke, to destabilize. Every instinct screamed caution, but action was unavoidable. The observer wasn't just an adversary, they were a shadow, a force operating in a space where perception and reality blurred. The ally whispered a strategy, guiding Clara through subtle maneuvers, weaving between danger and detection. But the observer was relentless. The strike wasn't random, it was a chess move, a test of timing, patience, and nerve. Every hesitation, every misstep could be exploited. Clara's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the room. The flickering lights, the distant hum of machinery, the faint shuffle of their own movements. She realized the observer's true power, not raw force, not numbers, but the ability to control perception, to manipulate fear, to force reaction before thought. Time stretched, seconds feeling like minutes, each one a crucible. The strike forced clarity, demanding decisions that were sharp, precise, and unforgiving. Clara adapted, moving through the chaos with a focus honed by every previous trial, every tightened corner, every hidden threat. Then, as suddenly as it began, the strike ended. The observer receded into the shadows, leaving a trail of tension, questions, and a subtle warning that the game was far from over. Clara exhaled slowly, muscles relaxing in stages, yet alertness remained, the aftertaste of danger lingering like a shadow across her thoughts. The observer had struck, and in doing so had reminded them all of a simple, brutal truth. In this game, awareness was survival, and underestimation was fatal. The room had shifted. Not physically, nothing moved, but the air was heavier, charged with tension that could be sliced with a knife. Clara sensed it immediately. Something fundamental had changed. The observer's last strike wasn't just a test, it was a message, a warning wrapped in precision and timing, and it had left cracks in their defenses, subtle but undeniable. Every step forward now carried weight. Every decision, every glance, every calculated risk could determine the next sequence of events. Clara's mind raced, piecing together patterns, tracing the observer's logic through the chaos. She could almost anticipate the rhythm of their movements, the pulse of their intentions, but only just. One misstep, and the fragile equilibrium would shatter completely. Her ally stayed close, shadowing her every move, eyes flicking toward the doors, the corners, the monitors. Communication was minimal, a nod here, a subtle hand gesture there. They didn't speak because words would slow them down, and speed was everything now. In silence, they became extensions of each other, a synchronized unit ready to react instantly. Then it happened. A subtle shift. A shadow crossing the threshold, something barely perceptible but enough to signal change. The observer wasn't just watching, they were acting, and the pace of the game accelerated. Clara's pulse spiked, her focus sharpening. She felt the balance of power tip, just slightly, but enough to create opportunity. It was time to act. The turning point had arrived. Clara moved with precision, exploiting the slight imbalance, the hesitation that the observer had inadvertently introduced. Each step was measured, each decision deliberate, each motion calculated to force a reaction. This was no longer just defense, it was strategy, control, a counter that required nerve and flawless timing. The observer reacted as expected, almost too predictable in their brilliance. Clara's instincts guided her, every decision slicing through uncertainty, transforming fear into advantage. The room, once oppressive, now became a battlefield of intellect and reflexes. For a fleeting moment the tide turned. The observer, formidable and unseen, was met with opposition that mirrored their cunning. Clara felt it, the first true crack in the shadow, a glimpse of vulnerability in the entity that had dominated every previous move. But even as the advantage emerged, Clara knew the game was far from over. The observer would adapt, recalibrate, and strike again. Yet, in this fleeting turning point, there was a promise. Momentum could shift, and even the most calculated predator could be forced to react. She inhaled sharply, heart still racing, aware that this was the moment where preparation met opportunity. The next move would be decisive, shaping the trajectory of everything that followed. Clara and her ally pressed forward, stepping carefully yet confidently into a future that was suddenly, perilously, full of possibilities.